The moon of Aegis 7 was a place where silence reigned, broken only by the faint hum of alien machinery and the occasional crackle of energy from its glowing crystalline spires. It wasn't Earth, far from it, but humanity had found itself here, stranded on this distant world after their colony ship malfunctioned decades ago. Now, they were no longer explorers or settlers, they were tools. Tools for the Valeth. The Valeth were an insectoid species with chitinous exoskeletons that shimmered like oil under the dim light of Aegis 7's twin suns. They moved with precision, their 6 limbs allowing them to multitask effortlessly. To the Valeth, humans were little more than clever animals useful for repairing their advanced technology but unworthy of respect or acknowledgement. Humans lived in shanty towns at the edges of Valeth cities, scavenging parts and cobbling together meager lives while being treated as disposable labor. Eli Carter worked alone in one of these sprawling repair yards, his hands stained with grease and his face streaked with sweat. He was known among the other humans as someone who could fix anything from broken plasma conduits to malfunctioning combat armor worn by the Valeth warriors. But today, something felt different. Today, Eli wasn't working on just another piece of equipment. A Valeth warrior stood nearby, her massive frame casting a long shadow over him. Her name or designation, as far as Eli understood, was Kel. She was unlike most of her kind. While other Valeth ignored humans completely, Kelvern occasionally watched Eli work, her multifaceted eyes glinting with what might have been curiosity. Eli didn't know why she singled him out, but he tried not to think about it too much. Thinking too hard about the Valeth usually led to trouble. Kelvern's battle armor lay before Eli now, its sleek black surface marred by scorch marks and dents. It looked like it had seen action recently, though Eli couldn't imagine what kind of fight would leave such damage. Still, he approached the task methodically, running diagnostic scans with a handheld device cobbled together from spare parts. As he worked, he noticed subtle differences in this armor compared to others he'd repaired. There were intricate engravings along the edges, patterns that almost seemed artistic, not something you'd expect from a race so focused on efficiency. As Eli tightened a bolt near the chest plate, Kelvern shifted slightly behind him. Her voice came through the translator device, clipped to his belt, low and guttural yet somehow clear. "You are thorough, human." Eli froze for a moment, startled. The Valeth rarely spoke directly to humans unless giving orders. He glanced over his shoulder and saw her towering form watching him intently. Thanks," he muttered, unsure how to respond. "Just doing my job." She tilted her head, a gesture that reminded Eli uncomfortably of a predator sizing up prey. "Your job is beneath you," she said after a pause, "yet you perform it with care." "Why?" Eli blinked, caught off guard by the question. Number 1, not even his fellow humans had ever asked him why he did what he did. "I guess I want things to work right," he replied hesitantly. "If something breaks, people suffer. I don't want that." Kelvern made a sound that might have been laughter, though it was impossible to tell. "Suffering is inevitable," she said flatly. "Even perfection fails eventually." Before Eli could respond, she turned away, leaving him to finish his work in silence. For the rest of the day, her words echoed in his mind. What did she mean? Was she mocking him? Or was there something deeper beneath her cryptic statements? Hours later, as Eli polished the final piece of armor, he heard a soft whisper. At first he thought it was his imagination, the wind carrying fragments of sound across the barren landscape. But then it came again, louder this time. "Do you love me, human?" His hands froze, mid-motion. The voice belonged to Kelvern, though her lips hadn't moved. Instead, the words reverberated inside his head, bypassing the translator entirely. Eli's heart pounded as he slowly turned to face her. Standing there, her armored form gleaming in the dim light, she stared down at him with unreadable eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Kelvern stepped closer, her clawed hand reaching toward him. Eli instinctively flinched, but she stopped short, her fingers hovering inches above his shoulder. "Answer," she commanded, her tone sharp but tinged with something unfamiliar, something almost vulnerable. And just like that, the mystery deepened. Why would a Valeth warrior ask such a question? What did she mean by love? And why did Eli suddenly feel like answering her might change everything? Unbeknownst to Eli, this encounter marked the beginning of something far greater chain of events that would challenge not only his understanding of the Valeth but also humanity's place in the galaxy. On Aegis 7, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Eli's mind raced as he stared up at Kelvern, her towering form casting a long shadow over him. The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb, dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. "Do you love me, human?" she had asked, her voice piercing directly into his thoughts without the need for translators or devices. It wasn't just the words that unsettled him, it was the weight behind them, the raw intensity of her gaze. I don't know what you mean," Eli stammered finally, taking a cautious step back. His pulse thundered in his ears, but he forced himself to meet her multifaceted eyes. If there was one thing humans had learned about the Valeth, it was this. Showing fear only made them more dismissive or worse. Aggressive. Kelvern tilted her head slightly, her mandibles clicking softly, You do not understand, or you, to refuse to answer. It's not something we talk about, Eli said quickly, trying to keep his tone steady. He gestured vaguely toward the repair yard around them. We're here to fix things, not think about feelings. Her expression, if it could even be called that, didn't change, but Eli swore he saw something flicker in her alien eyes, something akin to frustration, maybe even confusion. For all their advanced technology and battle prowess, the Valeth seemed oddly clueless when it came to emotions. Maybe that was why she was asking him now, because she couldn't figure it out herself. Love is irrelevant, Kelvin said after a moment, her voice cold and clipped. Yet your kind clings to it. Why? Eli blinked, caught off guard by the shift in her tone. One moment she was probing him with questions, the next she sounded almost defensive. He hesitated before answering, choosing his words carefully. Because it gives us strength, he said slowly. It makes us care about each other, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Kelvin studied him silently, her claws flexing ever so slightly. Then, without another word, she turned and strode away, leaving Eli standing alone amidst the scattered tools and half-repaired machinery. Her sudden departure left him shaken, his thoughts swirling like storm clouds. What had just happened? And why did he feel like this conversation wasn't over? The next few days passed in tense uncertainty. Eli went about his usual tasks, repairing everything from cracked energy conduits to malfunctioning hover platforms, but his mind kept drifting back to Kelvin's question. Word of their strange exchange spread quickly among the human workers, though no one dared speak of it openly. Humans weren't supposed to interact with the Valeth beyond giving orders or receiving instructions. Asking personal questions, worse, demanding answers, was completely unheard of. Still, whispers circulated in the shadows of the repair yards. Some thought Kelvin might have been testing Eli, seeing how far she could push him before he snapped. Others speculated that she was gathering data on human behavior, perhaps preparing some new experiment or weapon. But a smaller group, including Eli's closest friend Mara, believed there was more to it. She's curious, Mara said one evening, as they sat together on the edge of the repair yard, watching the twin suns dip below the horizon, maybe even confused. You know, how they see us as tools, not people. But if she's asking about love, then maybe she sees something different in you. Eli frowned, tossing a pebble into the glowing fungi that grew nearby. Or maybe she's just messing with my head. Mara shook her head firmly. No way. The Valeth don't waste time unless they have a reason. Whatever she wants, it's important. Before Eli could respond, a distant hum interrupted their conversation. Both of them turned to see a sleek black transport skimming low over the landscape, its engines kicking up clouds of dust. It landed near the center of the repair yard, and moments later, Kelvin emerged, flanked by two other Valeth warriors. They moved with purpose, heading straight for Eli and Mara. Stomach tightened as Kelvin approached. Up close, her armor gleamed with freshly polished surfaces, handiwork, and she carried herself with an air of authority that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Without preamble, she addressed him. You will come with me. Mara stepped forward instinctively, placing herself between Eli and the Valeth. Why? What do you want with him? Kelvin's gaze shifted to Mara, her mandibles twitching slightly. This does not concern you, human. Step aside. For a brief moment, Eli thought Mara might argue further, but she glanced at him and nodded reluctantly. Stepping back, she whispered under her breath, "Be careful." As Kelvin led Eli toward the transport, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far bigger than himself. The other Valeth warriors climbed aboard first, leaving him and Kelvin alone for a moment. Before boarding, she turned to him once more, her voice low and deliberate. Your answer matters more than you realize. And with that cryptic statement, she ushered him inside. The journey took them deep into the heart of the Valeth city, a sprawling labyrinth of crystalline towers and humming machinery. Eli had never been allowed this far before, and the sheer scale of the place left him awestruck. Every surface pulsed with faint light, and the air buzzed with energy. Despite his awe, however, unease gnawed at him. Why had Kelvin brought him here? What did she expect from him? When they finally arrived at their destination, a massive chamber filled with glowing consoles and holographic displays, Kelvin motioned for him to stop. Around them, dozens of Valeth technicians worked tirelessly, their movements precise and mechanical. At the center of the room stood a massive hologram depicting a star map, with several points highlighted in red. This is our war, Kelvin said simply, gesturing to the map. Our enemies approach, and we are outnumbered. Your kind has proven useful in maintaining our weapons and armor, but now we require something else. Eli frowned, struggling to follow her logic. What do you need from us? Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering. Hope. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. Hope from humans, the same humans who had been treated as slaves and servants for years. It didn't make sense, but then again neither did anything else about this situation. Kelvin leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, human, do you believe your kind can endure? Can you fight for something greater than survival? Eli swallowed hard, his mind racing. This wasn't just a test anymore. This was a challenge, one that demanded more than technical skill or brute strength. It required faith, resilience, and yes, maybe even love. I don't know, he admitted, quietly. But if anyone can find a way, it's us. For the first time, Kelveran's expression softened, if only slightly, and in that fleeting moment, Eli realized something profound. Perhaps the Valeth weren't as invincible as they seemed. Perhaps they needed humanity just as much as humanity needed them. The chamber was eerily silent except for the faint hum, with energy coursing through the crystalline walls. Eli stood frozen, his mind grappling with what Kelveran had just said. Hope, it wasn't a word he associated with humans on Aegis 7, not anymore. Hope had been beaten out of them long ago by years of servitude and oppression under the Valeth. Survival was all they had left. But now, standing in this alien command center, surrounded by towering insectoid warriors and glowing holograms of impending war, Eli felt something stir deep within him, something fragile yet defiant. Kelv watched him closely, her multifaceted eyes gleaming like shards of obsidian. You hesitate, she observed, her tone sharp but not unkind. Do you doubt your own kind? Eli shook his head slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. It's not that, he began, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. Humans were survivors. We adapt, we endure. But hope, that's something else entirely. You can't just ask for it. It has to come from inside. Her mandibles clicked softly, a gesture that might have been contemplation or impatience. Then perhaps you must teach us, she replied, her words carrying an unexpected weight. Our enemies are relentless. They do not falter. They do not despair. To defeat them, we need more than weapons. We need resolve. Eli stared at her, stunned. The idea of humans teaching the mighty Valeth anything felt absurd, almost laughable. Yet here she was, asking, not demanding for guidance. For the first time, he saw a crack in their armor, both literal and metaphorical. Beneath their cold efficiency and superiority complex lay uncertainty, even vulnerability. Before Eli could respond, one of the other Valeth warriors approached, its chitinous exoskeleton glinting under the pale light. It emitted a series of clicks and chirps, which Kelveran interpreted via her translator device. Her expression hardened as she turned back to Eli. The enemy fleet is closer than expected. Time is short. Eli's heart sank. Whatever hope she sought, it wouldn't matter if they didn't act soon. He glanced around the room, taking in the holographic star map once again. Red dots representing enemy ships were converging on Aegis 7, their trajectory unmistakable. If the Valeth fell, humanity would be next, and there would be no mercy for them. What do you want me to do? Eli asked finally, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. How can I help? Kelveran hesitated before answering, as if weighing her options. Then, with a flick of her clawed hand, she gestured toward the hologram. Your kind excels at repair. At creation, perhaps there is something you can build, something that gives us an edge. Eli frowned, stepping closer to examine the display. The Valeth technology was advanced beyond anything humans had ever created. But he knew one thing for certain: machines could only go so far without ingenuity, and ingenuity was something humans had in spades. I'll need access to everything, Eli said after a moment, his confidence growing. Blueprints, materials, tools, whatever you've got. If you want me to help, I need full cooperation. Kelveran's gaze narrowed, but after a brief pause, she nodded curtly. Very well, follow me. Over the next several days, Eli worked tirelessly alongside a team of human mechanics assembled by Kale, Viren. They were given unprecedented freedom to explore the Valeth's vast arsenal of technology, poring over schematics and testing new ideas. For the first time in years, humans weren't treated as mere laborers. They were collaborators, contributors. The change was subtle but significant, and it ignited a spark among the workers. Mara joined Eli early on, her sharp mind and quick hands proving invaluable. Together they devised a plan to retrofit the Valeth's combat armor with modular upgrades designed to enhance mobility and durability. But Eli had another idea, one that went beyond physical modifications. We need to give them heart, Eli told Mara late one night as they pored over blueprints sprawled across a makeshift table. Not literally, of course, but symbolically, something to remind them why they're fighting. Mara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What did you have in mind? Eli tapped a finger against the blueprint, pointing to a section near the chest plate. Here, instead of just reinforcing the armor, we embed something personal, something meaningful, like symbols or messages. Messages, Mara echoed skeptically. You mean like graffiti? No, Eli said with a small smile. More like reminders, words of encouragement, phrases that inspire courage. Even the Valeth might benefit from knowing they're not alone. Mara considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. It's risky. What if they think we're mocking them? It's worth a try, Eli replied firmly. If Kelveran wants hope, then maybe this is how we give it to them. When the first batch of upgraded armor was ready, Eli presented it to Kelveran personally. She examined it carefully, her claws tracing the intricate engravings. They had a mix of Valeth glyphs and simple human phrases like together. We stand, and for those who cannot fight. Her reaction was unreadable at first, but then she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that might have been approval. "This is unusual," she admitted, her voice tinged with curiosity. "What purpose does it serve?" "It serves the soul," Eli replied simply. "Sometimes, strength isn't enough. Sometimes, you need to believe in something bigger than yourself." Kelvin studied him for a long moment, her expression softening ever so slightly. Then, without another word, she donned the armor and signaled for her warriors to follow suit. As the rest of the Valith began equipping themselves with the modified gear, Eli noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor. Their movements seemed less mechanical, their postures more resolute. Whether they understood the meaning behind the engravings or not, the effect was undeniable, but the true test was yet to come. As the enemy fleet drew nearer, tension mounted across Aegis 7. The humans and Valith prepared side by side, their fates intertwined. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that this alliance, however tenuous, was more than just a tactical decision. It was a revelation, a glimpse of what could be possible when two vastly different species chose to see each other not as tools or threats, but as partners. Doubts lingered. Would their combined efforts be enough, or would the fragile bond between human and Valith shatter under the weight of war? Only time would tell. The battlefield was unlike anything Eli had ever imagined. Aegis 7 skies, usually painted with the soft glow of bioluminescent fungi and distant stars, were now choked with smoke and streaked with flashes of plasma fire. The air buzzed with the hum of energy weapons and the deafening roar of explosions as Valith warriors clashed against their relentless enemies, the Zinrak, a hive-minded species that moved in perfect synchronization, their sleek black ships blotting out the horizon. Eli stood on the edge of the conflict, his heart pounding as he watched the chaos unfold. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a mechanic, someone who fixed things. But here he was, standing shoulder to shoulder with Kelvin and her warriors, gripping a makeshift weapon cobbled together from spare parts. It wasn't much, but it was all he hadn't right now. It felt like enough. The upgrades to the Valith armor seemed to be holding up well under the strain of battle. Their movements were faster, more fluid, and their resilience allowed them to withstand blows that would have otherwise been fatal. Yet what struck Eli most was the subtle shift in their demeanor. The engravings etched into their chest plates of unity, courage, and hope seemed to resonate with the warriors in ways no one could have predicted. They fought not just as individuals, but as part of something greater. Kelvin herself led the charge, her armored form cutting through the Zinrak ranks like a blade through silk. Her every strike was precise, calculated, yet infused with an intensity that went beyond mere combat efficiency. It was almost as though she carried the weight of her people's survival and humanity's on her shoulders, and perhaps she did. But despite their initial successes, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Zinrak outnumbered them 10-1, their endless waves of drones pressing forward without hesitation or fatigue. For every enemy unit destroyed, two more took its place. Even the modified armor couldn't hold out forever against such overwhelming odds. Eli ducked behind a shattered crystalline spire as a burst of plasma fire sizzled past his head. His hands trembled as he reloaded his weapon, his mind racing. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, not after everything they'd worked for, not after finding common ground between human and Valith. There had to be another way, Mara, he shouted over the din of battle, spotting her nearby. She was tending to a wounded Valith warrior, her hands moving quickly as she patched up a damaged joint in its exoskeleton. "We need to do something." Mara glanced up at him, her face streaked with soot and sweat. "What can we do? We're outmatched." "I don't know," Eli admitted, desperation creeping into his voice. "But if we don't try, we're finished." Before Mara could respond, Kelvin appeared beside them, her claws dripping with alien ichor. Her eyes locked onto Eli, unyielding. "Speak human. What is your plan?" Eli hesitated, his mind scrambling for an idea. Then it hit him, a memory sparked by the glowing fungi scattered across the battlefield. Those fungi weren't just decorative, they emitted bursts of electromagnetic energy when disturbed. If they could harness that energy. "We use the environment," Eli said quickly, pointing toward the glowing patches of fungi. "If we overload those spores, we might create a chain reaction in EMP pulse, strong enough to disable their drones." Kelvin tilted her head, considering his words. Such a tactic would require precision. One misstep, and we risk harming ourselves. "It's risky." "Yeah," Eli admitted, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "But it's our best shot. Trust me." For a moment, Kelvin simply stared at him, her multifaceted eyes unreadable. Then, with a sharp nod, she signaled for her warriors to regroup. "Do it," she commanded. "Human, you will lead." With Kelvin's blessing, Eli and Mara sprang into action. They gathered a small team of humans and Valith engineers, working together to modify several portable energy conduits scavenged from the repair yard. The goal was simple: channel the fungi's natural energy into a concentrated blast capable of disrupting the Zinrak's systems. As they worked, Eli couldn't help but marvel at the collaboration unfolding around him. Humans and Valith moved in tandem, their differences melting away in the face of shared purpose. For once, there was no hierarchy, no sense of inferiority or superiority. Just people or beings working side by side to survive. Finally, the device was ready. It was crude, cobbled together from mismatched parts, but it hummed with potential. Eli strapped it to his back and turned to Kelvin. I'll plant this near the largest cluster of fungi. Once it goes off, it should take out most of their forces. Kelverin's mandibles twitched slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her features. You risk much, human. So does everyone else, Eli replied with a grim smile. Let's make it count. Eli ran through the chaos, dodging blasts of plasma fire and leaping over fallen debris. Behind him, Kelvin and her warriors provided cover, their coordinated attacks keeping the Zinrak distracted long enough for him to reach the target zone. As he reached the glowing fungi, he set down the device and began activating it, his fingers trembling as he entered the final sequence. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over him. A Zinrak drone had broken through the line, its glowing red eyes locking onto him. Before Eli could react, Kelvin lunged forward, intercepting the drone with a ferocious swipe of her claws. The creature collapsed in a heap, but not before, firing a burst of energy that grazed Eli's arm. Pain seared through him, but he gritted his teeth and finished the activation process. Get back, he yelled, stumbling to his feet as the device began to whir louder. Kelvin grabbed him by the shoulder, pulling him away just as the first wave of energy erupted. The fungi exploded in a dazzling cascade of light, sending out a massive electromagnetic pulse that rippled across the battlefield. One by one, the Zinrak drones froze mid-motion, their systems fried by the surge. Within moments, the tide of the battle shifted dramatically. Eli collapsed to his knees, exhaustion and pain washing over him. Kelvin knelt beside him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. You have done well, human, she said quietly. Perhaps better than I expected. Eli managed a weak smile, his vision swimming. Hope told you it works. As the dust settled and the surviving Valith warriors gathered around, a new understanding began to dawn, not just for the Valith but for humanity as well. This victory wasn't just about survival. It was proof that even the smallest acts of ingenuity and cooperation could change the course of history, and somewhere deep inside, Eli knew this was only the beginning. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, save for the faint crackle of lingering energy from the electromagnetic pulse. The Zinrak drones lay motionless, their sleek black forms scattered across Aegis 7's glowing landscape like discarded toys. For the first time in hours, there was a moment to breathe, but no one dared relax. The victory felt fragile, almost too good to be true. Eli sat on the edge of a shattered crystalline spire, clutching his injured arm as Mara tended to the wound with what little medical supplies they had. His head throbbed, and every breath felt heavy, but he forced himself to stay focused. Around them, the surviving Valith warriors moved methodically, collecting data from the fallen enemy drones and securing the area. Their movements were efficient, yet there was an uncharacteristic slowness to their actions, as if they too were processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Kelvin stood nearby, her armored form gleaming faintly under the dim light of the twin suns. She watched Eli intently, her multifaceted eyes unreadable but piercing. Your tactic saved us, she said finally, her voice low and deliberate, but it also revealed a weakness. Eli looked up at her, wincing as Mara tightened a makeshift bandage around his arm. What weakness? Their reliance on technology, Kelvin replied, her claws flexing slightly. It is both their strength and their flaw. They cannot to adapt without it. Unlike you, unlike us. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For all their advanced weaponry and hive mind coordination, the Zinrak lacked something fundamental. The ability to improvise, to think creatively, when faced with unexpected challenges. It was a lesson that resonated deeply, not just for the Valith, but for humanity as well. Mara finished wrapping Eli's wound and glanced between him and Kelvin, her brow furrowed. So what happens now? Do we keep fighting, or do we try to negotiate? Negotiation is not an option, Kelvin said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. The Zinrak do not seek peace, they seek domination. If we show weakness, they will exploit it. But we're outnumbered, Mara countered, gesturing toward the horizon where more Zinrak ships loomed ominously. Even if we win this battle, how long can we hold out before they overwhelm us completely? Kelvin hesitated, her mandibles clicking softly. Then, after a pause, she turned her gaze back to Eli. You have given us hope once. Can you give it again? Eli swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her question settle over him like a leaden cloak. He wasn't a strategist. He wasn't even a soldier. All he'd done so far was cobble together solutions from scraps and desperation. But looking into Kelvin's eyes, those alien, unreadable eyes, he realized that maybe that was exactly what made him different. Maybe that was why she kept turning to him. I'll need help, Eli said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him, not just from humans, but from your people too. We can't fight them alone. Kelvin tilted her head slightly, considering his words. Then, with a sharp nod, she signaled for her warriors to gather. "Speak," she commanded. "Tell us your plan." Eli stood before the assembled group of humans and Valeth, his heart pounding as he explained his idea. The EMP blast had crippled the Zinrak drones temporarily, but it wouldn't last forever. Once their systems rebooted, worse, once reinforcements arrived, they would resume their relentless assault. To truly turn the tide, they needed to strike at the source, the Zinrak command ship orbiting high above Aegis 7. "We hit them where it hurts," Eli continued, pointing to a crude map sketched in the dirt. "Their central hub controls everything there. Weapons, their communications, their entire network. Take that out and we cripple their entire operation." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. One of the Valeth warriors stepped forward, its Katana's exoskeleton glinting menacingly. "Such a mission would require infiltration, sacrifice. Are you prepared for that, human?" Eli met the warrior's gaze squarely, his jaw tightening. "If it means survival, then yes." Kelvarin raised a clawed hand, silencing the murmurs. "Then it shall be done. Human, you will lead this mission. My warriors will accompany you." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the group. Humans and Valeth working side by side was one thing. Trusting each other with life decisions was another entirely. But as Eli scanned the faces around him, he saw something unexpected, a flicker of unity. Perhaps it was born out of necessity, perhaps out of shared struggle, but it was there nonetheless. The journey to the Zin command ship was fraught with peril. Using one of the Valeth's smaller transport vessels, the team navigated through debris fields and avoided patrols until they reached the massive orbital structure. Its surface bristled with weapons, turrets, and defensive systems, a monolithic fortress looming against the void of space. As they prepared to board, Kelvirin approached Eli, her expression unusually somber. "This may be our final act," she said quietly. "If we fail, humanity and Valeth alike will perish." Eli nodded, his grip tightening on the makeshift weapon strapped to his back. "Then let's make sure we don't fail." With that, the team launched their assault. The corridors of the Zinrak ship were dark and labyrinthine, filled with the hum of machinery and the eerie silence of an automated system. Every step felt like walking into a trap, but they pressed onward, guided by Eli's determination and Kelvirin's tactical precision. When they finally reached the central hub, a pulsating core of energy surrounded by glowing conduits, Eli knew they had only moments before the Zinrak detected their presence. Working quickly, he and the engineers rigged explosives to overload the system, while Kelvirin and her warriors held off waves of approaching drones. As the countdown began, Eli glanced at Kelvirin, who stood beside him, her claws dripping. "With alien ichor, if this works," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos, "do you think things will change? Between us and your people?" Kelvirin's gaze softened ever so slightly. "Change is inevitable. Human, whether it leads to understanding remains to be seen." The explosion rocked the ship, sending shockwaves rippling outward. As alarms blared and lights flickered, the team scrambled back toward their transport vessel, pursued by collapsing walls and cascading debris. Behind them, the Zinrak command ship began to disintegrate, its destruction marking a turning point in the war. But as they escaped into the cold emptiness of space, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, not in defeating enemies, but in forging alliances, in proving that humanity and Valeth could stand together, not as masters or tools, but as equals. And for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that such a future might actually be possible. The transport vessel shuddered violently as it broke free from the collapsing Zinrak command ship, its engines straining against the pull of debris and gravity inside. The air was thick with tension, exhaustion, and the metallic temps of blood. Eli sat hunched over in his seat, clutching the armrests tightly as the craft hurtled through space. His injured arm throbbed mercilessly, but he barely noticed. His mind was still reeling from what they had just accomplished, or rather, what they hoped they had accomplished. Behind him, Kelvirin stood near the cockpit, her armored form silhouetted against the fiery glow of the disintegrating enemy vessel. Her multifaceted eyes were fixed on the destruction unfolding outside the viewport, watching as the once mighty Zinrak hub imploded into a cascade of light and energy. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the faint hum of the transport systems and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Then, without warning, the comm channel crackled to life. A voice emerged, distorted but unmistakably belonged to one of the Valeth warriors stationed back on Aegis 7. "Central hub destroyed. Enemy forces destabilized. Repeat, central hub destroyed." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the cramped cabin. Mara slumped back in her seat, covering her face with her hands as tears of relief welled up in her eyes. One of the Valeth engineers let out a low chirp, sound that might have been laughter or satisfaction, and even Kelvirin allowed herself a rare flicker of emotion, her mandibles twitching slightly in what could only be interpreted as approval. But Eli didn't celebrate, not yet. As the adrenaline began to fade, doubt crept in. Had they truly won, or merely delayed the inevitable? The Zinrak were relentless, their hive mind unyielding. Would this victory inspire them to regroup and retaliate with even greater ferocity? And more importantly, what would happen now between humanity and the Valith? Kelverin seemed to sense his unease. She turned away from the viewport and approached him, her movements deliberate and measured. "You question our success," she observed, her tone neither accusatory nor dismissive. It was simply a statement of fact. Eli hesitated before responding, choosing his words carefully. "It's not about whether we succeeded here," he said finally, gesturing toward the fading wreckage outside. "It's about what comes next. What happens when the fighting stops? Will things go back to how they were before for us? I mean..." For a long moment, Kelverin said nothing. Then, with a slow tilt of her head, she replied, "That depends on you, and on us." Her answer caught Eli off guard. He had expected deflection, perhaps even outright dismissal. Instead, she seemed to acknowledge something deeper in understanding, that the battle against the Zinrak was only part of a larger struggle. Humanity hadn't just fought for survival. They had proven their worth not as tools or laborers, but as equals capable of ingenuity, resilience, and courage. As the transport descended toward Aegis 7, the full scope of their achievement began to sink in. The skies above the moon were clearer now, no longer choked with smoke and plasma fire. The glowing fungi that dotted the landscape pulsed gently, casting an ethereal light over the battered repair yards and crystalline spires. Survivors gathered below, both human and Valith, their faces etched with exhaustion but also hope. When the transport touched down, Elio stepped out cautiously, followed closely by Kelverin and the rest of the team. The scene was surreal, humans and Valith standing side by side, sharing supplies, tending to wounds, and exchanging quiet words of gratitude. It was a stark contrast to the rigid hierarchy that had defined their relationship for so long. Here, amidst the ruins of war, something new was taking shape, something fragile but undeniable. Mara approached Eli, her expression softening as she handed him a canteen of water. "Looks like you did it," she said with a small smile. "Not just beating the Zinrak, but changing things." Eli shook his head, his gaze drifting toward Kelverin, who stood nearby overseeing the recovery efforts. "I didn't do it alone," he replied quietly. "None of us did." At that moment, Kelverin signaled for everyone's attention. Her voice carried across the makeshift assembly, firm yet resonant. "Today, we faced and I prevailed, but our survival was not achieved through strength alone. It was achieved through unity, through trust." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Eli. "The human known as Eli Carter showed us something we had forgotten, that hope is not weakness, but strength. That cooperation is not compromise, but evolution." Her words sent a ripple of murmurs through the gathering, both human and Valith alike. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Change wouldn't come easily, not after centuries of ingrained prejudice and oppression, but the seed had been planted. Eli felt a surge of emotions swell within him, overwhelming and bittersweet. This was more than just a victory, it was validation. Humanity wasn't perfect, they never claimed to be, but they had something the Valith lacked: adaptability, empathy, heart. As Kelverin stepped closer to him, her towering form casting a shadow over him, she extended a clawed hand, not in dominance, but in offering. "Tell me, human," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of vulnerability he had never heard before. "Do you believe we can coexist?" Eli stared at her hand for a moment, then reached out and clasped it firmly. "Yes," he replied, without hesitation, "but it won't be easy. We'll need to learn from each other, trust each other, fight for each other." Kelverin's mandibles clicked softly, almost imperceptibly, as if she were processing his words. Then, for the first time, she lowered her head in what could only be described as respect. "Then let us begin." In that moment, under the dim light of Aegis 7's twin suns, something profound shifted. The barriers between species began to crumble, replaced by a tentative but hopeful alliance. Humans and Valith weren't just surviving anymore, they were building something together, something stronger than either could achieve alone. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, Eli knew one thing for certain: they had taken the first step together. Weeks passed, and the landscape of Aegis 7 began to transform, not physically, but in ways that mattered far more. The glowing fungi still pulsed softly under the dim light of the twin suns, and the crystalline spires continued to hum with energy. But something deeper had shifted, a quiet revolution unfolding beneath the surface. The repair yards, once a place where humans toiled in silence under the watchful eyes of their Valith overseers, now buzzed with collaboration. Humans and Valith worked side by side, exchanging ideas and skills as equals. Tools clinked against metal, laughter mingled with conversation, and the air carried a sense of purpose that hadn't existed before. It was messy, imperfect, and occasionally tense, but it was progress. Eli stood at the edge of the yard one evening, watching the scene unfold before him. Mara was nearby, showing a group of Valith engineers how to modify an energy conduit for greater efficiency. Her hands moved quickly, her voice animated as she explained the intricacies of human ingenuity. Nearby, Kelvin observed silently, her multifaceted eyes glinting faintly in the twilight. "You've changed them," Kelvin said suddenly, stepping closer to Eli. Her tone was neither accusatory nor congratulatory, just matter-of-fact. Eli shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Not just me, all of us together." Kelvin tilted her head slightly, considering his words. Then, after a pause, she replied, "Perhaps. But you were the catalyst. You reminded us of what we had forgotten." Her admission caught Eli off guard. For all her strength and authority, Kelvin sounded almost vulnerable. It was a reminder that even the most formidable beings carried doubts, fears, and questions within them. And perhaps that was the key to understanding, not seeing each other as superior or inferior, but as flawed yet capable individuals striving for something better. As the suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, Kelvin turned her gaze toward the distant stars. "The Zinrak are not gone," she said quietly. "Their defeat here does not mean the end of their threat. They will return, stronger and more determined." Eli nodded, his expression sobering. He knew she was right. The galaxy was vast, and conflict rarely ended cleanly. But he also knew something else. "When they come back," he said firmly, "we'll be ready. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we're united." Kelvin's mandibles clicked softly, almost imperceptibly, as if she were processing his words. Then, with a slow nod, she added, "Unity is fragile. It must be nurtured, protected. And that's on all of us," Eli replied, meeting her gaze squarely. "Humans and Valeth alike." Later that night, Eli found himself standing atop one of the crystalline spires, gazing out at the sprawling expanse of Aegis 7. The glowing fungi cast soft patches of light across the ground, and the faint hum of machinery filled the air. It wasn't Earth, it never would be, but it was home now. A new kind of home, built not through conquest or domination, but through cooperation and trust. Mara joined him moments later, her silhouette outlined against the starlit sky. She handed him a canteen of water, then leaned against the spire beside him. "You think this will last?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. Eli took a sip from the canteen, letting the cool liquid soothe his parched throat. "I don't know," he admitted after a moment, "but I think we've proven something important, that humanity isn't defined by where we come from or what we look like. We're defined by what we do, by how we treat others." Mara smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the shimmering lights below. "And maybe the Valeth are starting to see that too." Maybe Eli agreed. Or maybe they're still figuring it out. Either way, we've made a start. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Slowly but surely, the alliance between humans and Valeth grew stronger. Joint missions were launched to explore uncharted regions of Aegis 7, seeking resources and knowledge that could benefit both species. Schools were established, where young humans and Valeth learned side by side, sharing stories, traditions, and dreams. Even the engravings etched into the warrior's armor became symbols of unity, reminders of the shared struggle that had brought them together. One evening, as Eli prepared to retire to his quarters, Kelvin approached him once again. This time, however, her demeanor was different, softer, almost contemplative. "Human," she began, her voice low and deliberate. "I have a question." Eli raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is it?" Kelvin hesitated, her claws flexing slightly. Then, with a rare flicker of vulnerability, she asked, "Do you love me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Eli froze for a moment, startled not by the words themselves, but by the weight behind them. Love wasn't something he associated with the Valeth. It was a concept they had long dismissed as irrelevant. Yet here she was, asking it again, out of curiosity, but perhaps out of longing. After a long pause, Eli smiled softly. "Yes," he said simply. "Not in the way you might think, but yes, I love what we've built together. What we can become." Kelvin studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow tilt of her head, she replied, "Perhaps that is enough." As the years passed, the story of Aegis 7 spread far beyond its borders, carried by traders, explorers, and refugees who marveled at the unlikely alliance forged there. Humanity and Valeth were no longer seen as master and servant, oppressor and oppressed, but as partners, equals, proof that even in a galaxy rife with division and strife, hope could take root in the unlikeliest of places. And though challenges lay ahead, Eli knew one thing for certain: the galaxy had changed because of what they had done, because of who they had become. As he gazed up at the stars one final time, he whispered to himself, "Humanity, heck yeah."